Is Bangladesh now a democracy?
I think so. I mean, we can, of course, raise the question of what kind of a democracy is it when one of the parties was excluded from the election, a major political party, one of the two largest parties in Bangladesh. And that is a reasonable question to raise. Nevertheless, I believe that we have a great measure of restoration of democracy. We got 60% of the people voted, which is a little bit less than we would have seen in a fully competitive election. And I think that's understandable because I would imagine that a large chunk of the Awami League voters would have stayed home. But what this also shows is that a significant chunk of Awami League voters came out and voted, even though perhaps they had a limited choice in terms of who they would have voted for.
Now that he will be Prime Minister in his own right and setting his own relationship with India, what sort of relationship do you think he'll want?
I think he will want a cooperative relationship. I think, and this is not just Tarique Rahman, if you look at opinion polls in Bangladesh, they show that upwards of 75% of the population believe we should have a positive, friendly, and cooperative relationship with India. I think there is a large vocal minority who would like a hostile relationship with India, but it is a minority. And so that has to be kept in mind. I think there is a lot of ill feeling still between Bangladesh and India. I think a lot of unhappiness in Bangladesh with respect to the role India is perceived as having played to prop up the Awami League government of Sheikh Hasina. But at the same time, most Bangladeshis are realistic and they understand that having a hostile relationship benefits neither country.
Will Tarique Rahman be able to guarantee the safety and security of the Hindu community in your country?
Well, certainly not only is it an issue which is very important to the Indian public as well as the Indian government. I would suggest that it should be much more important to those of us here in Bangladesh. And so the protection of the minority community here, especially the Hindu minority community, absolutely needs to be foremost in the minds of the BNP.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on The Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Thursday's elections in Bangladesh have produced a landmark result. Tarique Rahman's Bangladesh Nationalist Party has won well over 2/3 of the seats, but with 77, the Jamaat-e-Islami and its allies could still be an effective opposition. So today we analyze what this means for Bangladesh. Has democracy been restored, or is that questionable because the Awami League was barred from contesting? What sort of government will the BNP provide? What sort of policies will it follow? And what relationship will it seek with India, China, and the United States? Those are some of the key issues I shall discuss today with the editor of the well-known weekly newspaper, Counterpoint, Zafar Sobhan. Zafar Sobhan, before I come to the result, let me ask if you believe after Thursday's elections, has democracy been restored in Bangladesh? Is Bangladesh now a democracy?
I think so. I mean, we can, of course, raised the question of what kind of a democracy is it when one of the parties was excluded from the election, a major political party, one of the two largest parties in Bangladesh. And that is a reasonable question to raise. Nevertheless, I believe that we have a great measure of restoration of democracy. We got 60% of the people voted, which is a little bit less than we would have seen in a fully competitive election. And I think that's understandable because I would imagine that a large chunk of the Awami League voters would have stayed home. But what this also shows is that a significant chunk of Awami League voters came out and voted, even though perhaps they had a limited choice in terms of who they would have voted for. So I think, yes, I mean, I think the situation is complex. I, for one, was in favor of the Awami League being allowed to compete. I think it was a mistake to keep them out of the election. That said, I do understand the reason for keeping them out. This is not an issue which has any easy answer or any easy resolution. And sometimes decisions have to be made which are suboptimal. All things considered, if you look at the political firmament of Bangladesh, I think this was the best result we could have hoped for. And I'm very hopeful that moving forward, we will have a functional democracy. And I'm also hopeful that in the coming months, that the Awami League will be reintegrated into the democratic firmament.
Your answer suggests that the exclusion of the Awami League has impaired the democratic credibility of the elections. To what extent do you think it's impaired it? Is it marginal? Is it substantial? I noticed that you would have preferred the Awami League to contest, and I also noticed that Bangladesh's own polls suggest that up to 20%, some people say 30% of the voters would have voted for the Awami League. So to what extent has this impaired the credibility of the democracy that's now been brought in?
It has been impaired, but not majorly. I think you have to look at the big picture. The big picture is we are still a very fractious nation. There is still a lot of anger. There's still a lot of unhappiness to do with the atrocities committed by the Awami League when they were in power, culminating in the massacre of July and August of 2024. So while there are some people who would have preferred the Awami League to participate in the election, myself included, there are more people who would have preferred the Awami League to stay out of the election. And were the Awami League to allow to participate, that would have created its own other problems. So given this is the situation in Bangladesh, which are trying to hold together this very fractious polity with a lot of anger, a lot of bad feeling between the two sides. And when I say the two sides, I really mean the Awami League on the one hand, and those who are active in the movement to oust the Awami League and who saw many of their comrades shot down, killed, maimed. Because of this reality, it's not an easy solution. You can't just say, well, look, we think that the Awami League should be there and let the chips fall where they may. It's a much more complicated decision. That being the case, this being the background, I do think that the election we had was the best election we could have had. And I do think it is definitely sufficient to say that democracy is back on track in Bangladesh.
All right, then, against that background, let's come to the results. The Bangladesh Nationalist Party has won well over 2/3 of the 300 seats. Does this mean Bangladesh will have a strong and stable government, but also one that is under tremendous pressure to deliver results because expectations, I imagine, will have skyrocketed now?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think the results are pretty much in line with what most people would have anticipated. And it's important to notice that the Jamaat-e-Islam have a very good share of seats. So they're going to be a strong opposition. The interesting question is, with a 2/3 majority, to what extent will the BNP feel constrained by the referendum, which also passed, and to implement the every one of the articles in the referendum? I think that's going to be an issue. I think people do understand that even though they have a 2/3 majority, they have inherited a very difficult situation, and there are no easy answers to many of the problems Bangladesh faces. I think they will have something of a honeymoon period, but you're right, it's not going to last for long. And the three issues which they really are going to have to deal with very soon, which are going to be very difficult for them, is the first one is what are they going to do with so many people who are behind bars on spurious charges? I think they will have to let them go. And my understanding is that is their preference, to let the judicial process operate properly, in that let these people their cases come to bar, let them get bail, let them walk free, which didn't happen under the interim government. But they're going to get a lot of criticism from certain segments of society, so they're going to take a hit on that. Second issue is what are they going to do with the Awami League? And again, I think the BNP is inclined to try and lift the ban on Awami League, try and reintegrate them into the politics of Bangladesh. But again, they will probably take a big hit on that, because there are constituencies in Bangladesh who would be very unhappy about that. And then finally, the big issue is, of course, our relationship with India. And I think, again, the BNP has signaled, and India has signaled as well, that they would like the relationship to be normalized, for things to go back, largely to the way they were, and to start cooperating and collaborating again. However, again, there is a large constituency in Bangladesh who is going to be opposed to that, and so that is going to be politically difficult for them. So these are the three things which I think they're going to struggle with. I think they will take all of these steps. I think they're the right steps to take, but I think they will pay a political price for it.
I'll come to the three issues that you mentioned in a moment's time, but let me go back to an early part of your answer. You said that the Jamaat-e-Islami and its allies, which together have 77 seats, will be a strong opposition, but they do face up to a BNP that on its own has got 209 seats, which means that on its own, the BNP has a two-thirds majority, and with its allies, it's either got 3 more or maybe it's got 5 or 6 more. We're not completely sure. But in the fact that they face up to a government which is a two-thirds majority, very comfortably so, will it really be a strong opposition, or will it be a weak one?
Well, no. I mean, what we feel is that things have changed in Bangladesh, and this is the great promise of the July uprising, is that, the political parties, the governing party understands that even though you have the power to run roughshod over the opposition, that no longer is that going to be acceptable to the Bangladeshi people. Also, there are many reforms which have been put in place, have now been voted for through the referendum, which will also limit the power of the government to run roughshod over the opposition. And I think if you look at the public pronouncements made by BNP, Tarique Rahman, who is seen to be the Prime Minister in waiting, and other senior leaders of the party, they have also pledged to work closely with the opposition. So I think really what we have to understand, or what we're all hoping for, is that after the July uprising, that the entire country has turned a page. In what we have seen before, it's not really just a question of how many seats you have, it's a question of the mindset. And the mindset has changed, and I think the BNP has learned a lesson from what happened to the Awami League. They have learned that even if you have the votes, even if you have the seats to run the country in a authoritarian or dictatorial way, you do so at your own peril.
Tell me, how do you view the performance of the National Citizens Party? I'm told that the 6 seats it's won are better than what was expected on the eve of the elections. But given that this is the party of Gen Z that started the monsoon revolution, isn't it a disappointing outcome for them?
I mean, yes and no. I think if you are comparing the situation to where they were and what their public position was a year or a year and a half ago, then yes, it would look disappointing. A year and a half ago, they were the heroes of the revolution. They had brought down an authoritarian government, and they were really, on everyone, in everyone's hearts. However, they did a lot to squander this public acceptance over the last year and a half. And so by the time the elections rolled around, if you had asked me, and in fact, I took part in a show where I made a prediction, I would have thought they'd have win 1 or 2 seats. So the fact that they ended up winning 6 seats and have gone close in another handful is actually an overperformance for them. So I think they should actually be very happy, because at the end of the day, we also have to be realistic. This is politics. This is politics in a first-past-the-post system. This is a new political party. These things take time, and I think it's good that it was always unrealistic to think that they could come out of the gate and automatically win dozens or scores of seats. If you look at Imran Khan's party, let's say in Pakistan, when you have a new party which comes out to threaten the existing established parties, usually it takes a long time. And I think 6 seats is an encouraging showing for their first election. It's given them enough to build upon. And so the hope is that they can then now build this into a workable political party, which will provide a suitable alternative to the Awami League, the BNP, and the Jamaat. So I think actually, all things considered, they have reason to feel happy.
Let's come to Tarique Rahman, the 60-year-old leader of the BNP. He returned to Bangladesh in December after 17 years in exile in Britain. What can you tell me about him? To most Indians, we know only that he is Khaleda Zia and President Ziaur Rahman's son, but beyond that, we know very little. So what can you tell me about him?
Well, it's very interesting because, of course, his public image, and indeed, I suspect this is based on his personality, seems to have undergone quite a transformation in the 17 years he is abroad. He seems a quite different person from the young man who went into exile 17 years ago. Now, when the BNP had been in power, under his, from 2001 to 2006, when his mother had been the prime minister, he was linked to all manners of corruption and really did not have a good reputation at that stage in time. It seems, though, that he has changed. If you look at his public pronouncements, if you follow his speeches, if you follow how he comes across, I think those 17 years in exile, those 17 years living in the suburbs of London, raising a daughter who is essentially a Gen Z British Bangladeshi, has had an impact on him. I met him for the first time at a fairly large gathering where he faced the press here in Bangladesh. He came across very well, soft-spoken, humble, modest. He spoke well. He seemed to have a fair degree of mastery of his brief. And since then, on the campaign trail, I think he has impressed when he's gone around. He doesn't have that kind of sort of barnstorming charisma, which we are used to seeing in subcontinental politicians. And of course, you know, we have seen that in all countries in the subcontinent. But I don't mind that. I think, in fact, I prefer this kind of quiet, wonkish persona which he seems to have. Someone said that his political speeches are more like TED Talks rather than your classic Bangladeshi political speech. And I think that's actually a pretty good way of stating it. But I prefer a leader, I think, who is a little bit more reserved and isn't, you know, the type of person who goes out and makes a barnstorming speech. So it remains to be seen. I think his biggest challenge, given his personality, is going to be whether he can control his political party, whether he has the character and the personality to really rein in some of the excesses which we've in fact seen over the last year and a half. If he manages that, I think he will be successful. When it comes to governance, when it comes to policy making, I think his quietness, I think the fact that he listens, the fact that he is consultative, and the fact that, you know, he surrounds himself with advisors and listens to what they have to say, will stand him in good stead. As I said, the real question is whether he will be able to exert control over his party.
Now, you began by mentioning the accusations of corruption that he's faced in the past, although I gather he's been either exonerated from them or they've been revoked. But Transparency International said of his mother's government that ruled Bangladesh from 2001 to 2006 that it was the world's most corrupt government. Is all of that forgotten, forgiven, and in the past?
To a certain extent, I think the voters are willing to give them a clean slate. You're not wrong about the BNP government. I moved back to Bangladesh in 2003. So my start in journalism came at that time. And I have a very vivid memory of what the BNP government was from 2001 to 2006. And to be honest, it wasn't great. Now, certainly, I would actually say that the sins of the Awami League government, certainly in their last term in office, the last 2 terms in office, overshadow that. But let's not try and pretend that when the BNP were in power last that they were angels. There were serious problems with that government, as you have alluded to with the Transparency International report. However, I think the Bangladeshi people are willing to give a clean slate to the BNP. They understand that was 17 years ago, or 18 years ago, in point of fact, and they are willing to take this new government and see what it delivers and take Tariq at his word as a new person and see what he delivers. But as you mentioned in one of your earlier questions, he is going to have to deliver. I think that honeymoon period is not going to last long.
What do we know about the sort of policies Tarique Rahman is likely to follow after he's sworn in as Prime Minister? Does he have a well thought out economic agenda for Bangladesh? I gather his manifesto commits the BNP to making Bangladesh a $1 trillion economy by 2034. But has he got a credible path to do that?
Well, I think 1 trillion is going to be tough, but I'm not an economist myself, but I talk to economists and they say it is possible. And, one of the things he is likely to have Amir Khusru is his finance minister, and he's likely to have other very able people around him. Ehsan Manzoor has been the governor of the Bangladesh Bank, our central bank, for the last year and a half. If he stays on, as seems likely, we have a very good, very professional person. The feeling is that the Bangladesh's economy is fundamentally sound. The problems we face are with corruption, cronyism, and mismanagement. To the extent that you can rein those in, it should be possible for a government to deliver economically. However, they have inherited a huge mess because there are massive amounts of non-performing loans in the banking sector. The problem there is the government is going to need to bail out the banks, probably going to do that by selling bonds. And what that means is that that's going to ultimately lead to lower growth. So I think we are going to see, for the first few years, lower growth than the government would have hoped. But that's what's really necessary to pull us out of this hole. However, as long as they manage to keep a lid on inflation, as long as they manage to make sure that the currency does not depreciate more. I mean, not long ago, Bangladesh was 80 takas to the dollar. Now it's over 120. So this was a big problem. These have largely been solved. And as long as he's able to solve these, I think as long as things don't get worse, people will be able to be patient on that. I know the business community has high hopes that policies will be put in place and regulations will be put in place to allow them to flourish. I think they felt that under the interim government, they were not able to do business the way they had hoped. I know that in the last few years of the Awami League government, they also felt that things were very, very difficult. So I think there's a lot of hope. 1 trillion may be, it's a campaign promise, it's a manifesto promise, it's an ambition rather than than a promise. But my sense is with the right people in place, they will be able to deliver. I talk to a lot of economists, I talk to a lot of business people. There is a lot of hope and a lot of confidence moving forward.
Let's come to how he will tackle the Awami League. You suggested earlier, and this is something that BNP people have been saying to the BBC as well, that whilst Tarique Rahman will hold the Awami League to account for his alleged misdeeds, he will also try and find a way of bringing it back into politics. Will that be a difficult tightrope for him to walk?
I think it will be difficult because one of the accusations which is laid against him, if you look at the political commentators, even the other parties, especially the NCP and the student-led parties, where you have a lot of anger against the Awami League. It's saying that, well, look, the BNP is too forgiving of the Awami League. And so, as I said, tempers are still very high. And there's a certain segment of the population which is really not yet ready for that reconciliation, which I think is important. I think reconciliation is absolutely crucial for Bangladesh moving forward. And I think Tarique Rahman and the BNP understand this, but they also have to balance the large segment of the population who's not quite ready. So threading that line is going to be one of his biggest challenges. There's no question about that. I think if he does it in steps, the first step may be there are many people who are incarcerated, who are behind bars and on charges which are fairly spurious. If you let the judicial process run its course, have them come up, have them released on bail, I think that would be a good start. It really kind of depends on how much political capital he has and how much political capital he feels he's able to burn on this. I know it's his intention, but of course, a lot depends on how the opposition comports itself. If it gives him this space, then I think we'll see quick movement on that. Again, actually here there's a role perhaps to be played by India as well, because I think one of the problems which the interim government certainly faced, and I think the incoming government will face as well, is the provocative statements being made by the ousted former Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, and to the extent that she can be encouraged not to make statements such as that by her hosts, that would help considerably, I suspect.
Now, when his mother was Prime Minister, and earlier when his father was President, relations with India were tense and difficult because New Delhi at the time perceived that Bangladesh was tilting towards Pakistan. Now that he will be Prime Minister in his own right and setting his own relationship with India, what sort of relationship do you think he'll want?
I think he will want a cooperative relationship. I think, and this is not just Tarique Rahman, if you look at opinion polls in Bangladesh, they show that upwards of 75% of the population believe we should have a positive, friendly, and cooperative relationship with India. I think there is a large vocal minority who would like a hostile relationship with India, but it is a minority. And so that has to be kept in mind. I think there is a lot of ill feeling still between Bangladesh and India. I think a lot of unhappiness in Bangladesh with respect to the role India is perceived as having played to prop up the Awami League government of Sheikh Hasina. But at the same time, most Bangladeshis are realistic and they understand that having a hostile relationship benefits neither country. And they would very much like to see a cooperative relationship. At a very basic level, Bangladeshis visit India, or historically have visited India in very, very large numbers. We come to India for medical reasons, we come to India for tourism, we come to India to go shopping. People, Bangladeshis, have typically come to India, not just West Bengal, all over India. And those doors have also been open to Bangladesh. And in the last year and a half, that has been much more difficult. Visas have been very difficult, if not impossible, to get. And this, of course, has had a negative impact on India as well. So these ties which have frayed need to be repaired. And I believe that Tarique Rahman would repair them. He's going to go slow because what he doesn't want is, of course, the India card can always be played. I think it's to the credit of the Jamaat-e-Islam party that they didn't actually play the anti-India card against the BNP in their campaigning. That said, the way the world is right now is you have, YouTube influencers and commentators who are not shy about playing that card. So it's going to always be a challenge. But I think he is going to be pragmatic. He is going to keep in mind the fact that being perceived as too close to India is, of course, going to be a political non-starter for a Bangladeshi prime minister. But at the same time, hostility does no one any good.
New Delhi has three key concerns. Let me put them to you one by one.
Sure.
When it was in power, the BNP Jamaat government at the time, it was believed, permitted Indian insurgent groups from the northeast, Ulfa in particular, a fairly free hand in Bangladesh. Is that likely to happen again?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And of course, what you say is correct. Again, I was in Bangladesh. I was covering. I was a newsman at the time, and yes, and this was a problem. And I think India, justifiably, was extremely aggrieved. No country will allow a neighboring country to shelter insurgents and to use its land to operate. So I think that was a very legitimate grievance of the Indian government at the time. And were something like that to recur, I think it would be a very grave problem for the bilateral relationship. That said, this was almost 2 decades ago. The world has changed dramatically. You don't have those insurgents, with the same power, the same strength anywhere, even operating in India, and for them to sort of start up on Bangladeshi soil after having been denied this space for the last 17 or 18 years is, I think, impossible. And I think also this new BNP understands that this kind of provocative act vis-a-vis insurgents would absolutely be unacceptable. And again, not just to India. I think stability in this region is not just a regional concern, it's a global concern. And so I think there would be very, very little appetite for the global community to tolerate such a thing. And I think the BNP understand this very well.
Second, given the relationship that Pakistan established with the Muhammad Yunus government, and which was looked upon very poorly by New Delhi, will Tarique Rahman seek to build on that, knowing that it could sour his relationship with Delhi, or will he be very careful in handling the two countries?
Well, he will, I think, build upon it to a certain extent. I think he will also be cognizant of the fact that if he is seen to be too pally with Pakistan, that will have a negative repercussion in New Delhi. But that said, you have to understand that the relationship between Bangladesh and Pakistan is very different again from what it was 2 decades ago. 2 decades ago, Pakistan was a much bigger country than Bangladesh. You had, when you talked about the insurgents operating in Bangladesh, I think there were very credible reports that ISI had a significant hand in those activities. Fast forward today, and the world is a very different place. Bangladesh is a much larger economy than Pakistan. On a per capita basis, we're 33% richer. Pakistan's ability to project power to Bangladesh is more or less zero. The notion that Bangladesh will become a plaything in the hands of the ISI is insulting. It is reading from a playbook of 2 decades ago, which is no longer existing in today's world. So I think the fundamental difference is that, yes, Bangladesh may have a good relationship with Pakistan, but the relationship we had 2 decades ago, which was so worrisome for India, is very, very unlikely to recur, simply because Bangladesh is a very different country from what we were 2 decades ago. And our relationship with Pakistan, even though it may be a good relationship, it is not going to be a subservient relationship. And therefore, India has nothing to worry about in terms of Pakistani activity, in terms of whether ISI is going to be active in Bangladesh. I think that is a concern which Delhi needs to wrap its head around and understand that we've moved to a new day.
Third, what will be the BNP government's attitude to and treatment of Bangladesh's 13 million Hindu community? That, as you know, is a matter of great concern, not just to the government in Delhi, but to the media, to social media in particular, to public opinion. Will Tarique Rahman be able to guarantee the safety and security of the Hindu community in your country?
Well, certainly, not only is it an issue which is very important to the Indian public as well as the Indian government, I would suggest that it should be much more important to those of us here in Bangladesh. And so the protection of the minority community here, especially the Hindu minority community, absolutely needs to be foremost in the minds of the BNP. Now, I think, again, Tarique Rahman and the BNP will understand. We had at least one Hindu gentleman who was elected, Gosha Chandra Rai, as an MP in Norashindi here in Bangladesh. And so he's, of course, been a senior leader of the BNP for many, many years. And I think, again, the understanding that taking care of the minorities, not just Hindus, we have a Christian minority, we have a Buddhist minority, is absolutely the bounden duty, and maybe you could say the first duty of any government. I think that there will be sensitivity towards that, and I think we can be very hopeful. Basically, what you see problems with minority protection are part of an overall law and order situation. So when law and order is poor in Bangladesh, then one of the things you see is vulnerable communities, of whom minorities are the most vulnerable, targeted. So, but it's part of a larger problem. And the larger problem is ensuring law and order and security for every Bangladeshi. And so I feel that the BNP government understands this. If you look at opinion polls, if you talk to people, what they really do care about is law and order. They care about law and order, they care about jobs. So understanding that, I think they are going to put a lot of emphasis on making sure that the safety and security of every Bangladeshi, including perhaps especially the minority community, is taken care of. Whether they succeed or not remains to be seen, but I do not think it will be for want of attention to the matter.
Do we have, Zafar Sobhan, any sense of how Tarique Rahman views Bangladesh's relationship with China and secondly with America, both of whom, as you know, are the world's two biggest economies and both have a very keen interest in the future of Dhaka?
I think we're going to find out. I mean, I think right now, like I said, he's not been in government, he's not even been in the country. And of course, you also have to understand that for Bangladesh, we are not in the greatest situation. We're not really in a position where we can have hostile relations with any of the large countries. We've talked about India, but the same goes, frankly, for China and the United States. The same goes for Japan. The same goes for Russia. Navigating this geopolitical reality is going to be a challenge. I think it is going to be a challenge for any Bangladeshi leader. How he is going to look at it, how he is going to situate his government geopolitically is something we do not yet know. Again, we could look at what the BNP has done and how it has comported itself, but really we're talking about a world 2 decades ago. The world today is a very different place when the BNP were last in power. It's going to be very interesting to see how he chooses to situate Bangladesh. But I think it's very clear, especially you have Trump in the White House, that we've just signed a trade deal with the US, that they very much want to keep good relationships with the US. And I think the good relations with the US these days is by trading with them. By the same token, the economy has become fairly dependent on China. We import a great deal of materials and goods from China. So again, having a poor relationship with China is really something which Bangladesh can't afford either. I don't know the answer to that question, and I think this is going to be a big challenge he's facing, and it's going to we're going to have to see whether the BNP is equal to the challenge. But I do think that's one reason why we wanted to see a democratic government in power here in Bangladesh, is because when you don't have a democratic government, it's difficult to make the big decisions. And so I think while the interim government had done a very creditable job over the last year and a half, so many of these big policy decisions were in deep freeze, and we hadn't really had any everything was waiting. And so now we're able to actually see what happens. So that's, I think, one good thing we can look forward to.
He faces one of the most challenging horizons that any incoming government anywhere in the world has ever had to face, Will his inexperience of governance be a handicap?
It may well be. I mean, we need to see, because he's going to be, and it's not just his inexperience of governance. He's not set foot in Bangladesh. You have to remember, for 17 years. These are certainly going to be challenges. But the hope is that you see, there are two models of leadership which we have here in Bangladesh. One is you have the all-powerful central leader, and nothing happens without their say-so. And that was kind of the model which Sheikh Hasina followed when she was in power, and we've seen the limitations of that. The second model is a more consultative model, where you surround yourself with a strong cabinet, you surround yourself with good people, and you listen to them. And that was more the model of leadership which was exercised by Khalida Zia, Tariq's mother. Now, the early indications are that he will tend more to the latter style of leadership. And I think if he does that, there are good people in the BNP, there are senior leaders. You've got Mirza Fakhrul Islam Alamgir, you have Amir Khusru, you have Abdullah Minto, you have Salahuddin, you have many people who are fairly experienced, who are very able, very competent. And I think he will put together a good cabinet. I think the next thing we are looking for is the formation of the government. And I think that will be our first clue, is we're going to then see how he is going to be able to govern. If the cabinet looks like a strong one, that will fill all of us with a great deal of confidence moving forward. If, however, for whatever reason, we feel that he staffs his cabinet with people who are not the right person for the job, or who have been chosen on reasons other than merit, that's going to be a very bad sign. So the first thing to look for is how he staffs his cabinet.
We're coming very close to the end of this interview, but there's one more issue I'd like to raise with you. Now, alongside yesterday's elections, there was also a referendum on what's called the July Charter, which I believe has been accepted with a 2/3 vote in support. 68% of those who voted for the referendum supported the July Charter. This puts term limits on the Prime Minister. It creates a second chamber of parliament. It strengthens the independence of the judiciary. It also strengthens the office of the president. And it ensures a caretaker government will take over 90 days before the next election. Let me ask you two twin questions. How significant are these changes? And is there any possibility that Tarique Rahman might cavil at translating them into constitutional amendments? Because that still has to be done.
I think they are significant. Of course, words on a piece of paper only mean so much if you do not have the political will and the mindset to actually follow through. But my sense is that this July Charter came about through a very consultative process. The BNP was part of that process. Almost every single item on the charter is something which the BNP has itself separately agreed to and consented to. So my sense is that they will implement the charter. They are not going to drag their feet on most of the provisions. They are, in general, provisions which should lead to better governance. And I think there's an understanding that the situation we had prior to August 5th, 2004 was fundamentally incompatible with a functional democracy. It was democratic in name, but there was just too much power concentrated in the hands of both the executive and the other organs of government. The one issue where they may drag their feet, and it's unclear to what extent they will commit to this, is having an upper chamber based on proportional representation. Because that is something which the BNP has never accepted or never been in favor of. And they may now, on this one issue, say that they think that it needs to be discussed further, that the mandate does not exist. They may question that. Other than that, when it comes to the caretaker government, when it comes to term limits, when it comes to increasing the powers of the presidency, when it comes to having a more neutral process for the formation of constitutional bodies. All of these things are ideas which the BNP themselves have agreed to and acceded to, and in fact part of their own manifesto, in their own reform program. So I think we'll see movement on those. I think it will make a difference. And part of the difference is also the mindset which has changed. I think the interesting point is what's going to happen with the upper house. And that remains to be seen, because on the one hand, you can say 2/3 of the people have voted in favor of this referendum. The counter argument is it's 48 million out of an electorate of 128 million. So you could make the argument both ways. But I think everything other than the upper house based on proportional representation will, in fact, be passed into law within the next 180 days.
My very last question. Now that its term in office as an interim government is about to end, I gather that handover of power could happen on the 17th or the 18th. How
That's
would
right.
you look back on Muhammad Yunus and the interim government he gave your country for 18 months?
I think what we have to remember is where this country was on August 5th, 2004. I think it's very important to understand that had Professor Yunus not stepped up in taking the reins of government at that moment, things could very well have descended into chaos. I think the entire nation does owe him a great debt of gratitude for taking up that role. And indeed, over the last year and a half, the situation that the government inherited was an almost unplayable hand. And I think, all things considered, they did a decent job. There are many things they could have and should have done differently. They made many missteps, there's no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, they were able to hold this country together through this transition. They were able to institute a great deal of reforms. They were able to stabilize the law and order situation, stabilize the economy, and finally they were able to hold a very credible, very good election. So I think at the end of the day, I would have to give them a good grade. I think a year and a half has been plenty of time. Had they stayed longer, that would have been problematic. But my sense is they never intended to stay longer. So I would definitely give Professor Yunus and his government a good grade. Like I said, it's not a perfect grade. I think when it comes to the judiciary, when it comes to some issues of law and order, they certainly could have done a better job. There are many things which they have done wrong, and many things which now the BNP government are going to have to fix once they come in. But overall, I think it was more good than bad, and I think the government, the country, does owe the interim government a debt of gratitude.
Zafar Sobhan, thank you very much for the time you've given me. Thank you for sharing with the audience in India your analysis and understanding of the new government that is about to take office in the next couple of days in Bangladesh. I'm deeply grateful. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.